here are some 7 most common Wi-Fi threats. Now, this does come from the NIST Foundation, so please check out NIST, NIST.gov, I do believe, for more information. Number 1 is we have configuration problems. These are misconfigurations or incomplete configuration. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you configure a password for your Wi-Fi access point for your network and it's password, well, that's a misconfiguration, right? That's not a very secure way to do it. So configuration problems. We see this quite a bit within the industry is misconfiguration. Denial of service. What denial of service is keeping you from utilizing the service, basically, rendering it unusable. What this entails typically is sending large amounts of traffic, packets, you may have heard packets, over the network with the intent of, hijacking resources or introducing backdoors. Now, denial of service, I'm going to kind of push back on this just a little bit. Some routers, I'd say most routers that we come into contact today, are a little more robust, so the denial of service has to be a little more sophisticated. It's not something simply just flooding a network. So, but denial of service is right up there. These attacks still happen quite a bit. Passive capturing, such as eavesdropping within a range of an access point to capture sensitive information. Now, you may say to yourself, isn't everything encrypted? Well, some of it is, some of it isn't. There are things called plain text packets, right? There's things that are transmitted plain text. We've seen that in the lab environment. We've actually seen that in the field as well. So that is a very, very sensitive one, is passive capturing. Eavesdropping I do believe in most U.S. states is illegal. So unless you have permission to be doing those types of activities. Rogue access points. Now, they come in a variety of form factors and products. I would say that there used to be a toolkit called Mana Toolkit that you could do. I think it's been deprecated. There are other platforms that allow you to do this, either with an access point. You could even do it with an ESP32 and an 8266 board, with that micro little form factor. You could actually make a rogue access point with that. Now, what that basically means is you are creating a false access point, as the definition says here, so that it tricks devices into connecting to them and then ultimately becoming the man in the middle. Evil twin attacks. This is when you impersonate a legit access point. If you've ever been to a Starbucks coffee and you see 2 Starbucks or see 2 access points that are named exactly the same, that is an example of an evil twin attack. We used to commonly do this on our penetration tests with hotels, hostels, things of that nature, where their Wi-Fi is very open for their guests. We would actually launch these evil twin attacks, and we're actually very successful. Now, again, we had permission to be doing this, and again, nobody was harmed, no machine was harmed in the making of that penetration test. A little joke for you. Hacking of lost or stolen wireless devices, basically bypassing the password to gain access. This is why a lot of laptops you see, a lot of more expensive ones, come with a lock or a cable that you can actually cable. I would say that laptop theft, phone theft, depending on the device, is very common in some areas. Freeloading. So this is when you piggyback on a connection or you intercept file sharing. Uh, is this common? It it depends on the situation. But again, whether you're going to come into it or not, that's debatable. However, this is just a very short list of common Wi-Fi threats. Now, I'm going to leave this up here in case you want to copy this down just to keep it handy, or screen snippet or whatever. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the wireless network security and the way that certain technologies have transformed that for us. Now, with the wireless network, this presents a very unique security challenge because the signal travels through the air, which is why this is vulnerable to interception. It's vulnerable to eavesdropping. It's vulnerable. Right? It's not hardwired, so it's passing through the air, and if you have a device that can capture it, there's always a security risk there. The one thing I really want to talk to you about within the security realm of wireless network is encryption. Right now, the modern encryption protocols that are widely used in Wi-Fi networks are WPA3 and WPA2. Now, these are widely used, and what they do is they secure the data by encrypting it as it travels between devices and the wireless access point, the Wi-Fi adapter. Now, WPA3 is the latest standard, and it does offer the stronger encryption. However, if you only have access to WPA2, that is very acceptable. It's very rare that you're going to see WEP in the field. In the laboratory, we do have some old routers that we do web hacking with. They will do WEP. But again, it's very rare that you're going to see these in the field. Now, what WPA3 does is it offers a stronger encryption, which it improves its resilience against brute force attacks. With that, we have AES encryption, which stands for Advanced Encryption Standard. It is the algorithm used by WPA3 and WPA2. It is considered highly secure to protect the data during a wireless transmission. So, just to pause here for a second, WPA2, WPA3, those are encryption protocols within Wi-Fi networks, wireless networking, however you want to refer to it. AES encryption is a standard, and it is the actual algorithm that's utilized by WPA2 and WPA3 to secure the transmission. As long as you don't get those mixed up, you're good. Now, that was encryption. We're going to move on and talk about authentication. Now, this is always a sore subject. Authentication. Authentication comes in many forms, right? The two I want to talk to you about is PSK authentication, and you'll see that setting in most wireless routers. PSK stands for pre-shared key. This is also known as the Wi-Fi password. The pre-shared key is shared among users to gain access to the network. You have a family member, you may or may not want them accessing your network, so you share the key with them. You share the password. Now, it is essential that you select a very strong and complex pre-shared key because of this reason. There are GPU devices that are really good at brute forcing, at guessing passwords. We're not going to get into the ways to generate very complex word lists. I would just say that use a very complex password to prevent unauthorized access to your network. And always change the default setting that came from your ISP. The other one is 802 authentication. Now, this is a more advanced method, and what it involves is using a radius service. What radius stands for is Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service. And this is a server that's used for authentication. You're more commonly going to see this in enterprise environments. So if you work at, let's say, an office and you have to access your dashboard, you may go in through, like, let's say, Citrix or some other type of dashboard. A lot of times you will be actually communicating with the remote authentication service. And that's how you're able to get in. Now, we don't commonly see this in home networks, and I would not urge you to try to set one in your own home network, as they are complex to set up and maintain. You must have a dedicated, or it's essential for it. Network visibility is another thing that we would like to talk about here. Is Kate and I have a very difference of opinion on this one, depending on the use case. Now, the SSID stands for Service Set Identifier. You can select to hide the SSID, and what this does by design is makes the network less visible. But it does not provide strong security, because there are tools that you can use to uncover the SSID. So again, this is more personal preference, if you will. I know, if you have a very clever network name, you may want people to see it. But again, disabling the SSID, that broadcast, it just means it's not going to broadcast it. It can, in some cases, deter people from attempting to connect to it. However, if you have a skilled attacker, it's not going to deter much at all. Now, another thing that I do particularly like is MAC address filtering. And what that means is it's restricting access to only specific MAC addresses. Now, what MAC addresses are, if you don't already know, they are the unique hardware addresses of devices. They're on the device. You can't change it. Now, you can spoof your MAC address, you just can't change it. Now, by doing MAC filtering, it can enhance security. However, with one really big caveat, is it can be quite cumbersome to manage, and it doesn't really provide robust protection, since, again, I mentioned MAC addresses can be spoofed. However, if you have a home network and you only want people with certain devices to access the network, MAC filtering would be great. Guest networks is another source of contention among some people. If you don't have a lot of guests, or you don't have guests that commonly use your Wi-Fi, you probably don't need one. Now, sometimes in a home lab environment, creating a separate network for a guest network would be great, because you can do some testing, and it's limiting impact on your primary network. That way, if you have crucial devices connected to your primary network, you're not impacting them. Captive portals. We've all seen captive portals before. Captive portal is just a web page that you must interact with before gaining access to the network. If you've ever stayed in a hotel and you put your last name and your room number before you access the network and you agree to the terms, that's a captive portal, much like Starbucks. It's free, but you have to abide by the rules. And again, that's a form of a captive portal. Captive portals can be spoofed. They can be cloned. So be very careful and make sure that when you're communicating with a service or with a captive portal, that you understand and you feel that it is legitimate, this is the hotel, this is Starbucks that you're dealing with. Now, just a quick pause here. When it comes to wireless security, again, there could be multiple courses to cover a multitude of topics. This is just to give you a basic understanding of wireless security. As you're going to be using Kismet in the field, wireless security is going to be huge because all of these things that we're talking about right now, you may be able to capture some of that in the field, or may be able to perform some of these common Wi-Fi threats in the field against access points as long as you have permission. Firewalls. Most routers have built-in firewalls, and these firewalls can be configured to filter traffic and block known threats. Depending on how robust your router is will depend on how much you can configure the firewall. That would be an example of a hardware firewall. Now there are software firewalls. You can install these software firewalls individually on individual devices. And what this does is just adds an extra layer of protection. Firewalls, they block unauthorized network access and they monitor outbound traffic for suspicious activity. And depending on the rules that you have set within your firewall will depend on what kind of response and what kind of output you're getting, or alarms that you're getting or not getting. Now, firmware updates. This is very important that you keep your router up to date. The manufacturers will release firmware to patch security vulnerabilities to improve performance. Now, in the real world, some router companies are better at staying on top of it than others. Some patch on the go, and some do batch patching, whereas a number of vulnerabilities will be detected before it sends out a new firmware, while others, it's almost like you're getting a firmware update every other day. So stay on top of the router updates. I wouldn't necessarily suggest automatically updating just because that's a known vulnerability, but I would stay on top of the router's firmware just to make sure that it is the most current and that all the security patches are intact. This really isn't going to apply to home networks as much as it will enterprise environment, but intrusion detection and prevention systems. These are software or hardware appliances that can detect and block suspicious activities on your network, such as intrusion attempts or malware traffic. Again, it's rare that you're going to see these in a home environment. You will encounter these in an enterprise environment. To what extent depends on, well, largely the budget of the enterprise. So what the goal of this section in Module 1 was education. For you to walk away with a little bit of education on some basic security measures, some common Wi-Fi threats, so that you may see these on your own home network. That the one thing I would tell you is that wireless security is an ongoing process. It's an evolving process, even in your home environment. It's not a one dial and set it situation. it requires a combination of monitoring, user education and awareness, robust authentication and encryption standards. If you implement these measures, you can secure your network for for yourself, for your family to use, and if you're in charge of an enterprise, does allow you to secure it there. I want you to take your time when you're looking at other things, like when you're looking at equipment, when you're looking at threats that are commonly out there. Alien Vault is a great way to stay on board of what's going on, or stay up to date what's going on. And I would just urge to learn more about wireless security. There are a number of sites out there. I know ExploitDB is a great one for vulnerabilities as well. Check out some of the government resources, nist.gov. They will help you out there as well. Next, we are going to be talking about interface basics. Honestly, this is one of my favorite topics. The one thing that I do believe that people, even in our industry, take for granted is the interfaces and what they know about them. So join me in the next video and we'll talk about interface basics.